Hey everybody, this is Mike with the One Stop Co-op Shop with a different type of review than I usually do since I have played through recently all of the Tanglewoods white, red, and gold sets, and I've also been returning to the original 20 strong sets, Solar Sentinels, Too Many Bones, and Victorum. I thought it'd be fun to talk through my thoughts on each of the sets overall and do a little rankings. I'm going to go from 6 to 1, but a few disclaimers before I do. First of all, these are all review copies that I received. Secondly, I played each of the new Tanglewood sets at least 3 times, and I played very recently in the last few weeks each of these sets at least 2 to 3 times. But this is a game that is pretty swingy, and some of the games I lost very quickly through bad luck. Some of the games I blew out of the water and destroyed the final boss with good luck, which I'll freely admit could twist my thoughts on some of them because, again, I didn't play any of them like 10 or 20 times to get a perfect sample size of the way the game could go. So these are just my current rankings at this point in time, and honestly, it's really pretty close. The very worst one, the number 6 one, as you'll see, is still one that I enjoy quite a lot, and the number 1 I still have some problems with, so none of them are flawless. But anyway, let's get into it, and I'm going to start with my number 6. And that is the Too Many Bones set, which again is not a bad set. I still enjoy it quite a bit, but it is my number 6. And let's talk about what's going on in this one briefly. One of the big things they added to go along with Too Many Bones is that you have this backup plan. So when you miss with dice, you can put them on the matching spot, and then you can spend that based on your character to do different things. And if you get all 4 of your backup plan spots filled, you can exhaust all those dice to level up, get a more powerful ability, and increase your stats a bit. And just like in the actual board game Too Many Bones, the day is increasing after each round, after each encounter, and you have to level up enough to defeat one of the 4 bosses by the end of those days. And you really want to be going through this encounter deck to be resolving these boss encounters, otherwise the bosses will be ridiculously powerful. And I like parts of this system. I like how the fights get harder and harder. I like the scouting mechanic that lets you have different piles and have more choice of who you're going to battle against. And I think the overall backup mechanic is interesting and works pretty well. But only 4 bosses isn't always enough variety. But the bigger problem for variety for me is that you're using most of the same cards in every play in terms of this encounter deck. Like you always have the exact same 4 trove chest items, the same 4 Molnor encounters, and 4 of the same 8 boss encounters. And because this is kind of the most important thing to have a chance against the boss, you tend to be digging through those and interacting with them constantly. So out of all the sets, this is the one that I kind of wish had an expansion to have more of these cards, to have more bosses. It's an experience that can feel a bit samey time after time, which is why it's my number 6. Next to number 5 is Hoplomachus Victorum, and with this being number 5 and Too Many Bones being number 6, I guess you can probably already see that I kind of prefer Tanglewoods overall more than the original releases. But in this one, you're moving around in this pyramid that advances upwards from round to round and facing the top card on whatever stack you're in, trying to dig down far enough in these stacks to get to these mini-bosses. And on the positive side, there's a lot of mini-bosses because each of the main characters has one. And there's also a lot of main bosses, so this has some of the best variety in the entire game. And the moving around thing is pretty cool, although I think they did it much better in some of the Tanglewoods releases. Another core mechanic is that a lot of your dice start out banished and you have to recruit them, kind of like units in the actual Hoplomachus game. I don't find this works that well because at least in my plays, I basically always get everything, so it's really not as interesting as it could be. Also, yes, they have a ton of bosses, but kind of like the actual Hoplomachus game, I didn't find that all of them work that well or feel fully tested. And then just a minor gripe, the key mechanic of defeating enemies, adding like these little heat tokens to the boss to make them harder at the end of the game kind of works, but it sort of feels like the game is punishing you for playing, so it's not my favorite way to ramp up the tension. Next to number 4 is the Tanglewoods Red set, my least favorite of the new Tanglewoods sets, although I do really enjoy it. This is basically Slay the Spire 20 strong style, in that you are moving up these nodes and facing monsters and having other little encounters, and you're trying to hunt down these minions of the big bad wolf in these mini-boss battles and finally get to the wolf and defeat them. And I do want to note, if you haven't watched my Tanglewoods videos, the 3 Tanglewoods sets are much more similar to each other than Victorum is to Too Many Bones is the Solar Sentinels, the original 3 sets. They have similar mechanics, repeated elements, repeated enemies, almost like they're riffing on the same system, whereas I feel like Victorum and Too Many Bones go in wildly different directions, and it's probably also because they had this idea to do the Baba Yaga set that I'm not including in this ranking that does kind of a campaign for all 3. But with that being said, I think the Merchant in red is the least interesting. They have the fewest options for how to spend your gold. Of course, that gives you more gold to bribe the enemies you fight, but still it just feels like a little bit of a missed opportunity. But the actual map movement and trying to to explore so they don't get too many nighttime sides, although sometimes you want the nighttime sides because they have more of the wolves so you can defeat them early. That whole mechanic of exploration and mapping out your way is really fun. Also, I love the amount of content here because all of the enemies also have a fable side on the other side, and these are really interesting too. So just like art-wise and content-wise, it's great. Another small complaint, sometimes it's luck-based how many fires you get that level up your stats because that's kind of the main way to level up. But I have found that in most of my games, I tend to be almost fully leveled up, which does make things a little bit less interesting. And sometimes the final boss fight can be a little underwhelming, although if you play against the bigger, badder wolf, it is certainly more interesting and requires more thought. Next is the Tanglewoods White set, my number 3. I had a bonus playthrough of this on Patreon, and this one has you moving around a grid of cards. And whenever you move on to a card, you flip it and fight it or resolve it if it's a fable, but then also the cards that are next to you might influence things and give you extra effects. So that in itself is pretty interesting. It feels like Victorum, except a bit more exciting and varied. Also like Victorum, as you fight enemies, you're kind of building up the bosses, but it's more interesting than in Victorum where it's just a purely negative thing because you're adding the cards to these little castle stacks, and you need to add cards because they limit how many dice you can roll in fighting the bosses. So it gives the game a bit more of an ebb and flow where you want to add these cards and you want to explore more, but if you kind of go too far, you could boost the enemies up too much. There's also a day-night mechanic, kind of like in Red with the flipping map cards, except here it's actually making the enemies more powerful. Not as interesting as Red's Day and Night or Gold's Day and Night, we'll get to that later, but still a pretty fun mechanic. The merchant is a lot more interesting, with just a lot more options to pay for, including scouting the way ahead. And one of my favorite things is that this is maybe the best release in 20 Strong in terms of de-emphasizing recovery, how many dice you get back for free after every combat, which is in pretty much every release the most important stat to raise up, and it more emphasizes strategy because it gives you more cards in this strategy area so you can like fight the exact right types of people or bring in good fables when you're adventuring. And because these castle stacks are limiting how many dice you can roll in combat against the mini bosses and the final boss, it's a lot more important to have multiple rolls from strategy to try to get criticals than having a high recovery stack because you're not using that many dice in the first place. Although one more complaint with White is that the fights never get that epic. The mini bosses tend to be by themselves and they only have 3 or 4 life, so they go down pretty quickly. And the regular fight, except for rare instances, will never be more than 1 or 2 enemies. So you never get like those crazy battles like you get in some of the other sets, but still really enjoy this one. But not as much as I enjoy my number 2, the set that started it all, Solar Sentinels. And I enjoy this one for a very simple reason. 20 Strong, when you boil it down, is a fairly random dice game. It can be swingy. You can have games where you die almost immediately. You can have games where you level up way too much and just bomb the competition out of existence. And Solar Sentinels, in a way, fits that model and type of gameplay the best because it's the quickest. It's the most straightforward. You can knock out a game of this in 20 or 30 minutes. You're fighting enemies on different stacks. There's no merchant. There's no items except from the enemies themselves, so the way you level up is kind of varied more than the other ones. You got these missions that give you different things to focus on and different challenges. And you got some bosses, not as many as some of the other sets, but they all work. They're all challenging. Solar Sentinels is, when you get down to it, 20 Strong distilled to its simplest components, and in some ways that shows the game off at its best. That's why it's my number 2. So that means my number 1 is the one that I did a playthrough of recently, Tanglewoods Gold. Yes, I super messed up a major rule in that one, and that I was drawing from the top of the forest deck instead of the bottom. But even with that, I still love this one the most out of the set, for a few key reasons. Number 1, I adore how they did the day-night mechanic in here, much more than how they did it in Red or White, because what's happening is, as you're doing these map cards, as you're facing off against the cards, they're slowly turning to their night side, which is more challenging, more dangerous. And this makes the game almost feel like something like Paleo, where you are sort of changing your environment as you go, and things are evolving with you. It makes the game get nastier in a really fun, organic way. It's fun to see how enemies or events evolve when they go to their night side and they come back around, so I just love that mechanic. Additionally, a big problem with 20 Strong in a lot of the sets, at least for me, is that leveling can be too consistent, and like I've said before, you can over-level and the final bosses can become nothing, like the easiest things to destroy. But in Tanglewoods Gold, the Forest Blessing is one of the main ways to level up. There actually aren't that many enemies that give you level ups otherwise. But the cost of the Forest Blessing goes up massively as your stats get higher. So while it's not that tough to get your strategy or recovery to 3 or 4, you're almost never going to get to the max of 6 of each, which again, I can do in a lot of the other sets without even breaking a sweat. which means fights don't feel as simple, don't feel as rote. You have to think about things more. You have to determine who you're going to bribe more. And that's also the case because of how the maps work, where you're drawing these cards and then you're flipping cards from the bottom, trying to get the directions that will finish off your map journey. Now, this can be random, it can be swingy, it can be frustrating, but it also leads to something that was lacking in some of the other sets, just these crazy epic battles. Actually, I do have to give credit. My number 6, Too Many Bones, also can get the epic battles when you go into the later days. But having tons of fables, having tons of enemies, trying to figure out how you want to split your gold to bribe them and survive. It's really fun. It's really varied. Now, the one part I'm not sure about that I love is the bear mechanic. So instead of this one having like giant final boss fights, instead, when you're ready, you pay to bring the bears into the deck, and they'll show up at random times, sometimes when you want them to, sometimes when you don't. And it can be a little swingy. Sometimes they come out when it's really easy. Sometimes they come out at the wrong time and destroy you. And sometimes the game does end with a bit of a whimper instead of an exciting, actual, final feeling boss fight. But still with the great day-night mechanic, with the less out-of-control leveling, with the more epic fights, this is my number 1 out of all 6 sets. So overall, looking at the 2 sort of seasons of releases, if you want a season that is more drastically different, I would go with the original 3. They really changed the mechanics in wild ways. If you want something that is, I think, a bit more consistently strong and interesting and complex, you can see that they're just like kind of thicker boxes with more stuff in them. I think you got to go with Tanglewoods. They are definitely an evolution of the system in a lot of ways. But I continue to enjoy 20 Strong quite a lot, and I'm very excited to see, what do they have? The Awaken Realms one's coming, as long as they don't have AI art, which I don't think they're going to, then I'm very excited to play those. And I definitely want to see more of the chip theory games given the 20 Strong treatment, like Burn Cycle and Cloudspire, 2 of my favorites. I have no idea how those would translate into 20 Strong, but I want to see them give it a try. But hope that was helpful for those already playing the system or interested in trying it out. Thanks for watching, everybody. Good gaming, and I'll see you at the next stop.